And finally, we have all the tools to implement our first ERC20 token. So let's start by implementing a simple transfer function, which allows anyone to transfer our token to someone else's Ethereum address. Okay, so before we can transfer anything, we need a way to store the balances for an address. So first, let's create a new mapping. This mapping is from address to uint 256. So now we can create the required ERC20 view function for getting the balances ourselves, which would look like this. Or we can just name the mapping balance of and make it public. This works because, as you might remember, Solidity auto-generates this view function of the same name as the mapping for us, so we don't need to write any of this. Now we can actually implement the transfer function. Let's go function transfer. This takes in the recipient address, so where the caller wants to transfer his tokens to, and the amount to transfer. And it will return true if the transfer was successful. And it's external because, of course, we want people from the outside to be able to call this function. Now first, we make sure that we are not sending to the 0 address by require recipient is not 0. This is just an additional safety feature, so people don't accidentally send tokens to an address they may have forgotten to enter, and it defaults to the 0 address, which would mean the sender has lost money, and we don't want that. Now we can check the sender balance through our balance of mapping. And getting the balance is as simple as just passing the address to the mapping. And msg.sender here is the person calling transfer. And if you remember how mappings work, this will internally calculate the Ketchak 256 hash of the msg.sender address to look up the balance value in the storage. And now, of course, we have to actually check that the sender has enough balance for the transfer and revert if he doesn't. And at the end, we can remove the transferred amount from the sender. Obviously, we have not actually changed anything in the state yet, so that's what we can do now. First, we can remove the transferred amount from the sender. And then we can add it to the recipient. And a little shortcut for this, which you may know from other languages, we can simply write as this, which is exactly the same thing. And return true at the end, because everything was successful, and that's what the ERC20 standard requires. Okay, so how cool is that? With those few lines of code, we created a contract which allows one to transfer tokens to a new address. Anyone who owns the token will now be able to call the transfer function with a recipient address and the amount to transfer. Fundamentally, ERC20 tokens are not much more than that. But if you remember, ERC20 requires one additional feature, and that is to transfer tokens on behalf of someone else. So that's what we'll be doing in the next chapter.